Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, wherever you are. I am Randy Lyman. I'm the pet uncle, and thank you for watching another episode of WAG of the Tale. WAG of the Tale is my weekly free-range variety magazine show about animals and the difference that people and animals make in each other's lives. So today I'm going to do something a little bit different than I have usually done. But first, let me just say you are watching WAG of the Tale, and every day there's a lot of other shows on the Petscope TV. The Petscope is the first Periscope and live streaming network that is all about pets and animals. And if you watch every day here on Facebook /the Petscope, we have a variety of broadcasters, a variety of shows every day. We have a veterinarian, we have a new broadcaster who talks about birds, we've got dog trainers, we have all sorts of things. And you can get the complete schedule and subscribe to the Google Calendar at thepetscopetv.com. You can see the URL down there. Get the complete schedule, have it all pop up on your Google Calendar. Just subscribe to that. And you can watch replays and get show notes of WAG of the Tale on my YouTube channel at WagOfTheTale.live, and of course follow me on Periscope and Twitter at the Pet Uncle. So thank you everyone for joining. Again, I'm Randy Lyman, the Pet Uncle. You are watching WAG of the Tale, and today, I thought I would talk about what's on my bookshelf. I do a lot of reading and research to produce this show each week. Some weeks more than others. I follow a lot of the news. I read a lot of books. I have certainly just really amassed a bit of a library, at least a whole bookshelf full of books in the course of just working on this show. And I thought I would share with you some of what it is that I have read for this show and have talked about on this show. And the things that I'm one of those people, I always have way more books than I have time to read. So I have a lot of unread books on my shelf, but I'm going to get to all of them. You will see. And thank you for all of the hearts and the interactions. And the little thumbs up and the little kitty cats popping up there on my screen. So I wanted to just share with you some of what I'm reading, because I've actually, in the last 10 years, there's been a lot of really, really fascinating things come out. People have studied animal behavior for a very long time, but up until recently, up until the last 15, maybe 10 years or so, you couldn't, you could talk about animal behavior in the scientific community, but you couldn't talk about what animals were actually thinking or feeling, because the scientific logic was, well, they can't tell us, so how do we know? But as it turns out, within the last 10 years or so, people are talking about, in the scientific community, are talking about this much more seriously. In fact, people like Diane Fossey and Jane Goodall, if you go back, they were ridiculed in their time by their colleagues for suggesting that animals could have feelings or go through phases or have personalities. Up until 10 years ago, you would still face that same kind of ridicule, and but that has now gradually begun to change. And over the last decade, there has been a whole slew of new books and findings and studies and publications about what animals actually think and feel. And there was, I started off talking about this, and I actually did a show about this, earlier this year in the spring, about animal science and animal spirits, where last fall, Scientific American did a special issue on the science of dogs and cats, talking about a lot of this new research. And I did a whole show on that, so I'm not going to go into detail there. You can see where I've made all my notes and pages I wanted to mark for that. But what I wanted to point out was that in the course of reading this, and this just came out last fall, so not even a year ago, I did a count, and something like 3/4 or 80% of all the literature, the scientific literature cited in this magazine, had been published within the last 5 years. It's all very, very recent and has been generating a whole slew of new books. So we're going to go over some of that today. And starting off with that, we want to take a look at some of the science of animals and look at some of the books about that. One of the first one, there's a book called The Genius of Dogs, How Dogs Are Smarter Than You Think. And in fact, there are not one, but 3 books that I found that are all about the intelligence of dogs that have all come out in recent years. And I just dropped all the books I was going to show you. So hold on a second. So anyhow, so there's The Genius of Dogs. There is Inside of a Dog, What Dogs See, Smell, and Know is another book here by Alexandra Horowitz. Another on the science of dogs. And What the Dog Knows, Scent Science and the Amazing Way Dogs Perceive the World. So you have not one, but 3 books now that you can pick up quite easily. These I got at the bookstore. Genius of Dogs I got on the Amazon Kindle, or I think the iBookstore. Read all about everything you want to know about dogs and how much they know. So let me pick up my other books here. Because I have not just been reading about, there's not just books to read about dogs, but there are also cats. A street cat named Bob. This is just apparently an enchanting tale of a London street musician and his relationship with his cat. Some hippie looking dude and his cat. So I'm like, all right, this is the perfect book. I got to just read this just for some entertainment. And when it comes to entertainment, here's a book about cats that you will like to read, called Lost Cat. This is about a woman. She had been in a not hospital. She'd been in a plane accident, and she was a small plane pilot and was bedridden for several months. And one of her cats ran away. So this is a book about her, or disappeared for like 6 weeks. And this is about her attempt with her partner to find where this cat had been going during the day, using GPS and maps and talking to her neighbors and everything. And it's really, the subtitle here is A True Story of Love, Desperation, and GPS Technology. And that's a great description of it. This is a very, very entertaining book. The author is very funny. And it's a really great and simple lesson about, because what actually, in other words, her losing her cat actually brought her closer in touch with the rest of her neighbors. So check out Lost Cat by Caroline Paul. I have also, and I did a whole show about rabbits once early on in season 1, Watership Down, just sort of a classic little fun novel about rabbits by Richard Adams, who started writing this book because his young daughters used to encourage him to do it. He used to make up stories about rabbits as they were driving through the English countryside, and they said, "Write it down, Daddy, write it down." Well, 40 years later, this book is a classic, great, interesting book about rabbits. And speaking of classics, there's 2 things that I have on my reading list that I want to read. Black Beauty, the original Black Beauty by Anna Sewell. This is apparently this book was actually, for its time, come out in the 19th century, very sort of really made a case against animal cruelty and about really respecting horses and the way that they think and feel and live. And they made a TV show about this called Gentle Ben. This the book is set up in the above the Arctic Circle, but the TV series, which starred Dennis Weaver as a local little Florida, is set in the Everglades in Florida, and he plays a little park ranger, and they have a bear as a pet. So, Gentle Ben, this kind of a classic. I talk a lot in this show, and of course, one of the themes of the show is the impact that Homo sapiens, human beings, our own species, has on the world of animals. We are, whether they are pets, whether they are in zoos, whether they are in sanctuaries, whether they are out in the wild, we are changing the world in which all animals live, and we bear a certain responsibility for that. So, I've been reading and talking on this show about a lot of books that have to do with humans and the natural world. And one of them, I did this very recently in a series that talked about this in a show and a scope from Lake Merritt, where I live in Oakland, California. It's the country's oldest bird sanctuary and wildlife refuge. But there's a great book that came out just this year called Unseen City by Nathaniel Johnson. He lives here in Berkeley. He's practically my neighbor. Talking about how he and his young daughter got to know the nature that's just down on their own city block, that's in their own neighborhoods. And he looks at squirrels and pigeons and snails and just the things that are right underneath your feet, literally and figuratively, within the urban landscape. Really great book, nicely written, really eye-opening. It really changed the way that I look at things now. So you want to check that out. Okay. I've talked also, speaking of the human impact on the animal world, I did a show about driving animals. Are we driving animals to extinction? It is actually kind of confirmed that we are the Earth is in a sixth wave of mass extinctions. The dinosaurs was just the most recent of them. And so there is a book called The Sixth Extinction, An Unnatural History. The one thing that, in the past, mass extinctions were caused by a changing planet. They were caused by comets and meteors, by various natural catastrophes. The sixth mass extinction distinguishes itself. It is the first and only one to be caused entirely by humans. And this is actually pretty much beyond a matter of debate now. So, the sixth extinction on some lighthearted reading, I'm sure, on my reading list for this winter. And sort of in that same vein, I have a book called The Humane Economy. This is sort of looking at it from the other side. Animal Protection 2.0, How Innovators and Enlightened Consumers Are Transforming the Lives of Animals. And this is sort of ways in which we're learning to live a little better with the animal world. So this is one I'm sure many of you out there will be interested in this theme. So this is something that I'm going to be looking at too. What are different ways that we can learn to relate to animals in the wild, in our own world? And sort of on that note, here's another book. Sorry, I wanted to show you one on my slides. It's a series of 3 books that I want to read by a journalist who lives here in the Bay Area. His name is Peter Laufer. I've had the honor to know him and work with him in the past. And he got a sort of an anonymous tip, or somebody just wrote to him. And he's been a journalist since the 1960s, and someone said, you should look into the world of exotic butterflies. And he went, what? But then he started looking into it and wound up from that coming up with not one, but ultimately 3 books about animals in our world. And the first one is called The Dangerous World of Butterflies. And he was interviewed on the Jon Stewart show about this, and Jon Stewart asked him, so is this like a world like you think of like the villains in James Bond movies on their isolated islands, and they've got their collections of exotic butterflies that they've scoured the world and killed people for, and this and that and the other? And Peter Laufer said, yeah, it's actually pretty much like that. So I'm really interested to read this book about the dangerous world of butterflies and those who collect exotic butterflies. He also wrote, sort of following up on the success of that, Forbidden Creatures Inside the World of Animal Smuggling and Exotic Pets. He has just really looked at this topic in depth. And then the third in his series of books, No Animals Were Harmed, The Controversial Line Between Entertainment and Abuse, and in which he talks about SeaWorld and bullfighting and all sorts of other things. So this is just a series of books. He's a well-known, world-renowned journalist, has been around for many, many years, has published numerous books, and maybe I'll even get him on the show one of these days to talk about these. I'm sure he'd be delighted to talk to people. And so, and the last book in this that I want to bring up in this little section here is called Why Did the Chicken Cross the World? The Epic Saga of the Bird That Powers Civilization. I cannot wait to dig into this. This is a world history of the chicken. We think of other and just the uses that they've been put to. It's like, I can't even imagine what all is in this. But you can see the little lines of chicken feet wandering all over the world, in Africa and Europe and the Americas. I want to find out, I can't wait to find out the story of chickens in this world. And that is certainly a topic that we are not, I'm sure, not as aware of as we could be. And I'm sure it's a very interesting story. And so sort of coming back to the original, one of the original topics, or what I mentioned at the top of the show, is all that we've been learning about the science of animals over time, and or in recent years in particular. And I've just found a number of books that have just really sort of talk about humans and what animals can teach us about being human, and just a lot of other, I don't know, taking it sort of to the next level, a very different set of ideas about how animals think and feel. And one of the books, you can't see it, I bought this at a yard sale, so it's got no cover on it. But I didn't know at the time, this book's called When Elephants Weep. Was published in 1995. It's actually seems to be as close as you can come, I suppose, to a classic in this sort of field. Published in 1995, this was one of the first books, and it's cited often in other literature, pointing out what I was saying at the very beginning about how the science of animals, the idea that animals can think and feel was simply not taken seriously. And in 1995, that was the predominant feeling. You were really on the edge if you suggested that animals could think or feel. And so this was one of the first books to really talk about that, and it's really great. I found it at a yard sale, but it's called, for $1, it's called When Elephants Weep. So that is one that is maybe a little dated. It's more if you're really into the understanding some of the science and history behind this, but it was definitely an interesting book to read. The Thing with Feathers, I did a show about this from Lake Merritt, talking about just various types of birds and some of the amazing things that we know about birds now, the way they can guide themselves by the magnetic fields of the earth in their migration flights and things like that. A whole range of things. The Thing with Feathers by Noah Stryker, definitely a great read. This was one of the first books I talked about on the show, The Soul of All Living Creatures, What Animals Can Teach Us About Being Human. This was like this is as close to a spiritual, meditative book as I've come across in all my animal reading. But it's really just beautifully written. The guy has his own, he's a veterinarian, Vint Verga, who also, as he makes clear, has a meditation practice, I think a yoga practice, and he really ties all those things together in a really amazing way. This was one of the just most amazing books that I've read in the course of all this. The Soul of All Living Creatures. In that same vein, How Animals Grieve by Barbara King. The other book, the first book from 1995, is called When Elephants Weep, and so I'm suspecting, although I don't know, that the title and the picture of this are sort of a play on that. Is How Animals Grieve, and it really talks about the rituals that elephants, giraffes have been shown to they have grieving behavior when one of their members dies. Elephants do. Ravens have been seen to just crowd around the body of a fallen bird and sort of hold a wake of sorts. Animals really appear to be they act as though they are really grieving and going through these sort of rituals. So this is a book I'm really eager to dig into, along with Beyond Words: What Animals Think and Feel by Carl Safina, another book that talks about the world of animals. Unlikely Friendships. Here is a picture book. This guy actually has a lot of pictures about just odd animal couples. Now, this is a phenomenon that has actually that is sort of, we know about this because of the internet, is a funny thing. We have here a picture of a monkey and a pigeon, and you've seen these videos on YouTube of a rhinoceros frolicking with a lamb and a deer and a rabbit playing together, and just dogs and cheetahs, and just bizarre combinations. And the thing was, this has probably been going on all along, but once YouTube got really popular, suddenly there were all these videos on YouTube about these just bizarre animal pairings, and there were so many of them that scientists kind of went, this is kind of a phenomenon. And it's actually opened up some new areas of inquiry into scientific or new areas of scientific inquiry, of wondering why is it that animals from different species just manage to sometimes just really get along with each other the way that they do. And so there are any number of documentaries and other articles that you can find, and videos on YouTube. There's no lack of them. And now it's reached a point where there are several books out about the topic. And so Unlikely Friendships, 47 remarkable stories from the animal kingdom. Let's just see how those, that can only be interesting. The Great Animal Orchestra, Finding the Origins of Music in the World's Wild Places. This is by Bernie Krause, who I've also talked about on this show. He is a world-renowned nature recorder, or recording artist, I guess. He's taken microphones out into the wild and he records environments and records animals. And his recordings were actually used for the gorilla sounds in Gorillas in the Mist, the Sigourney Weaver movie about the life of Diane Fossey. His recordings of humpback whales were used in the mid-1980s, 85, 86, I think it was, to lure Humphrey the whale out of San Francisco Bay back into the ocean. And now he's written a whole book about a theory of his that I have always found really fascinating. And I had the honor to meet this guy and work with him back in the mid-80s when he was really just starting to get known for this. That he has this idea that every natural landscape has a certain sound to it. The way that we recognize things by sight, oh, I recognize this place by how it looks, that animals can do that by sound, that every natural environment has a spectrum of frequencies from low to high that maintains or that stays constant over time. And so if something high-pitched like the birds go away and that sound drops out of the landscape, then something else that's high-pitched like crickets will come in so that the total sound spectrum of the place stays the same. And his theory is that animals are able to find where they are by listening to their environment the same way that we recognize where we are by looking at our environment. So he's got this book that just came out a few years ago. Dying to read this. This is going to be, I'm sure, very, very interesting. And another, excuse me, book, I've talked about this before in Smart Animal Planet was the name of my Wag of the Tail episode, where this is a great, really informative book with a lot of pictures and other things about smart animals, the smartest animals on the planet, birds, primates, elephants, you name it. There's a lot of things in here, the way that they are able to communicate, the way that animals are many of them are able to use tools and even to fashion tools. Some birds like ravens and crows can actually fashion tools out of twigs that they find to accomplish something. So this is a really interesting book. All the just you find out how smart animals really, really are. And speaking of smart, here's one. This one's for Dawn and Trevor and Cammie and all the dog trainers out there. You all teach your dogs the most amazing things. You're wonderful dog trainers. But here's one I put this out to you as a challenge: how to teach your dog the theory of relativity. This is a book by Chad Orzel. This is actually a science book. It's not, in fact, a pet book. But he talks about Einstein's theory of relativity in the form of a conversation with his dog. And instead of using Einstein's typical metaphors like moving trains and clock towers and beams of light and the kind of scientific pictures that Einstein used to paint, he does it in terms of the speed of dogs chasing cats and squirrels. And if the squirrel is running faster, then it gets foreshortened and has greater mass. So he just uses dogs and cats and other animals as the examples. But it is a book about science, but he is basically actually teaching the theory of relativity to his dog. So Dawn, Trevor, go for it. And here's a new trick that you can teach anybody else's dog, is the theory of relativity. So finally, to wrap it up, one last book that I've started reading. I want to work on this, and it's one of those classics that is just people should read. I think the books of James Herriot, all creatures great and small. His story of life as a veterinarian in rural England in the early parts of the last century, the 1920s and 30s and 40s, and coming up to World War II. And just you see what that whole world is like, the kind of medicines they had available, just the state of knowledge about animals. And of course, he's primarily working on things like horses and cows, but there's plenty of dogs and cats in there. But they're just wonderfully written books, entertaining. You will just fall in love with the whole landscape and the whole community of people that he meets there. So the James Herriot classics, all creatures great and small, all things bright and beautiful, all things wise and wonderful. And then he had a fourth book, The Lord God Made Them All. That's a line of verse from the Bible, I think. Anyhow, the books of James Herriot. So that is it for today's show. Thank you for watching. I will post all the titles and authors of all of these books on the YouTube show notes on WagOfTheTale.live, so you can get the names of these books if you want to check them out. And of course, feel free to post any comments down below. I'm happy to answer questions about any of the books. But there is, in the last 5 to 10 years, there have been a huge, just an explosion of books, scientific and otherwise, about all that we know about, have learned about animals in recent years. It is one of the most fascinating things about the world of animals is just finding out how much they really know and how little we knew about them before and how much we're learning now. This is all a very, very new field of research, and it's really fascinating to be following this. So thank you for watching. Watch the PetScope TV on Facebook. Get the schedule at thepetscopetv.com. And of course, you can watch the replays. Get my show notes at WagOfTheTale.live. Follow me at The Pet Uncle. So thank you for watching. This is Randy Lyman, The Pet Uncle, saying have a good rest of your day and good rest of your week.